Good evening and welcome to St Lawrence's Church, Stroud Centre for Peace and the Arts. I'm Hugh Richards, one of the church wardens here, and it falls to me to do the usual announcements before an event like this. So, in no particular order, toilets are across the way through the door you came in over there. Emergency exits in the unlikely event we need to use them. There's one over there where you go through a small room, out through a door and into the churchyard over there, or there's the door you came in. If you have mobility issues, please go to that one you came in through. If we do evacuate, the assembly point is at this end of the shambles. Please, if you've got phones with you that are on, put them on silent. If you have a hearing aid, then you should be able to use the T setting and benefit from that on our hearing loop and sound system. This event has cost quite a bit of money to put on, and all surplus funds that come from your donations will end up supporting the work of the Stroud Centre for Peace and the Arts here. So please donate generously if you haven't already done so. You can do so as you go out. Either with cash or as a contactless device, which has a default setting of £5, but you can ask for different versions if you want. And that, I think, is it. So I'll now hand on to you, your moderator.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you can all hear me at the back. Thank you for coming out tonight to attend this event on local government reorganisation, or LGR to the politicians, and how it might affect us here in Stroud and the surrounding areas. But first of all, a brief summary. So in a nutshell, the government wants to do away with two-tier local government, that's county and district councils, and replace them with what they call unitary authorities, ostensibly to deliver efficiency and cost savings. Now this plan was proposed in the English Devolution white paper, which was published in December 2024, and according to an explanatory document authored by the House of Commons Library, it's a continuation of several decades of a general move towards single-tier local government that started in 1992 and as recently as 2021 there were reorganisations as well. So the government want to replace our current two-tier system with a new type of single-tier super council or unitary authorities which will carry out all government functions. Up until now, two-tier areas like Gloucestershire have some local functions carried out by the district council, such as planning and waste collection, and some of the overarching ones by the county council, such as education and transport. These proposed unitary authorities will serve around 300,000 to 500,000 residents each, which is considered an efficient size. But there's more. These unitary authorities of 300 to 500,000 residents then need to combine in with neighbouring groups of three to be run by a strategic authority with an elected mayor. Therefore, they'll be serving between 900,000 and 1.5 million residents each. Now, it's up to the local councils to work together and draw up proposals for creating this unitary authority and which strategic authority they might join, and then submit those proposals to central government for consideration. So, Gloucestershire must now decide how to restructure. And there isn't much time. They've got to submit draft proposals, I think, in about a week. The three options that seem to be on the table here are to have one big unitary authority that covers the council and all the district councils, merging all 7 of those into one single authority. And that would serve the needs of around 658,000 residents. The second idea is that rather than having one single unitary authority, we'll have 2 smaller unitary authorities. We'd have Gloucester, Stroud and the Forest of Dean in one of those authorities, and Cheltenham, the Cotswolds and Tewkesbury in the other. So we split into 2, you see what I mean? And then the third option is something that some people are calling the Gloucester donut. And this is where the city of Gloucester and its surrounding villages would make up one unitary authority, and then the rest of the area, sort of the outer ring of the donut, if you like, would make the other unitary authority. So this has become pretty urgent. The government wants one final proposal, but all 7 councils are supposed to agree on this, if possible. And a working plan is due by next Friday, the 21st of March, and final plans by the 28th of November. So that's not much time on agreeing to something this big. So, with the help of our honoured and no doubt very well informed guests, we are going to explore and hopefully explain some of the details and implications of this change. But first of all, I'm going to introduce the panel to you. So, immediately on my left here is Simon Ofer, MP, MBE. He is the Labour representative for Stroud, as many of you will know, in Westminster. He took up this position after the general election in July of last year, but before that, Simon was a full-time GP in Dursley. And then, second from the end over there, we've got another MP, Sir Geoffrey Clifton Brown. Give him a wave, Geoffrey, just so they know who I'm talking about, thank you. Sir Geoffrey is the Conservative MP for the North Cotswolds. He's been an MP since 1992 and currently chairs the influential All-Party Public Accounts Committee in Parliament. And our third MP is Carla. There she's waving to you now. Carla Denyer. She is the co-leader for England and Wales of the Green Party. She became the MP for Bristol Central in July last year. And before entering politics, Carla was an engineer in the renewable energy industry. Now, joining our 3 MPs from local government is the Conservative leader of Gloucestershire County Council, Councillor Stephen Davis, who's over on the end there. And he is a former district councillor. He became leader of the county council in September of last year. So Stephen is obviously up to his neck in this stuff. So he will be able to provide us a lot of detail. As will Councillor John Bloxham, who is here. Councillor John Bloxham is the leader of the Labour group on the Gloucestershire County Council. John's a very lucky man, actually, because he lives here in Stroud. I thought that would get a laugh. Stroud would be
very serious business.
Yeah, obviously. Okay, I'm trying to keep it light. It's tricky.
You need to rob brother, doesn't he?
Oh, over the river.
Right, now, to prove I missed out. So, last, and certainly not least, we have Councillor Chloe Turner. She is a member of the Green Party, and she is a district and county councillor. And I found out just a few minutes ago she plays a trombone as well. That's true. Okay, we also, I should say, in passing, we invited representatives from the Liberal Democrats and Reform UK, but they have chosen not to attend tonight. So, before we get to questions from the audience, which we are going to do very shortly, I want to just get our 3 MPs on the panel to just give us their view of it, if you like, an overall view of the local government reorganisation from the point of view of them and their parties. So perhaps Simon, we can start with you, and I'm going to give you this microphone, which we're going to be passing around.
Great. Does it work?
Hello, can you hear? Oh, yeah, it's better. Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm Dr. Simon Ofer. I live in Ewley, and I'm your MP in Stroud. Look, this is I think this is a fantastic opportunity. This is, I mean, so much power in this country is concentrated at Westminster, and what we're proposing here is to give a lot of power to the regions, to these combined authorities. So, and I think that's a really, really good opportunity, and I think it's something that we mustn't miss out on, and we must grab with both hands. Why should we do it? Well, we could actually take control of our railways, our bus service, our housing, our community care, things that Andy Burnham is doing up in Manchester, we could do here, around here. And so I think it's really important we grab that. I won't go on too much about this, but I think also we need to get on the front foot about this and actually go for it in a big way. Now, I don't want to predict what type of unitary we're going to do, but I would like to say that we need to consider it from that devolution, that combined authority first, what works best with that. What I would say about the reorganisation is I didn't know, it's very complicated to know at the moment who's responsible for things. So, for example, leaf clearance is actually a responsibility of Stroud District Council. On the same road, weed spraying is a responsibility of Gloucester County Council, but if you're just cutting the grass, that's Stroud Town Council. Now, I didn't really know that. It's ridiculous. We need to have a much more coherent local authority system. So I'm going to leave it at that, just for provocation.
Thank you, Simon, and I'll just get Carla to comment next, if I may.
Thank you very much. So in the Green Party, one of our core principles is the principle of subsidiarity, which means making decisions at the lowest practical level. Now, for some things, that is national, or indeed perhaps international in the case of, say, climate negotiations. But our ambition always is for decisions to be made by the people that are affected, or as close to them as possible. So we are really worried about big decisions that affect local people being taken without their involvement. And from housing to GPs and dentist services to maintenance of our highways, traffic, people who live in the area are usually best placed to say what will work well in their area. That's not to say that cooperation across a larger area isn't a good idea, but it's about having the people that are most affected by it involved in that decision making in some way. Now, I'm not against changing the way that local government works so that decisions are made more efficiently. I was a local councillor in Bristol for 9 years before becoming an MP, and Bristol is a unitary authority, and I think I haven't been a councillor on a two-tier system, but I have friends and colleagues who are and have been. I'm pretty certain that for Bristol, the unitary system definitely is better, but I can really see the argument that especially in more rural dispersed areas, it might not be. And so my point is that rather than national politicians making the decision, it should be people at the local level who ultimately make that. Final point, it's worth saying that because this proposed abolition of district councils is happening at the same time as imposition of a new higher level of local or regional government with combined authorities, this is not reducing the number of different levels of local government. It is just sucking more power up towards the centre. Now, Simon said that this is going to be all about devolution, and I would very much like that to be the case, but since combined authorities first started to be introduced, even though the argument for them at the time was that more power would be devolved down from national government, in actual fact, because this happened while I was a councillor, we saw that in reality, powers were sucked up from the local level. And so I'm very worried that the same will happen here.
Thank you, Caroline. Okay, and Mr. Jeffrey, if I could get you to do the same thing.
Thank you very much. Well, good evening, everybody. And thank you very much for comparing us, as it were. And thank you to St Lindsay's Church, I hope I got that correct, for hosting us here today. Is it Lindsay's Church? Lawrence. I knew it was one or the other. My mother is Lindsay, my father is Lawrence, so I couldn't remember which. Anyway, it's great to be here. Now, I am not at all surprised if all of you are totally baffled about what is going on. And I'm actually not entirely sure, having listened to my two colleagues, that I would be any further forward than I was. Let me just try in a very easy way to put across what is going to happen. Now, let's be absolutely clear, up till now, any change was purely voluntary. This government has now dictated that we are to change. We have no option but to do it, so we have no option but to enter into a unitary authority. Stephen and his colleagues, as he will explain in a minute, I'm sure, have the unenvious task by the 21st of March of writing to the government to say what unitary authority proposals he would favour, the County Council would favour. That doesn't mean to say that there aren't other options as already been described. But basically, a unitary authority will combine all 7 authorities, the 6 districts, the 1 county, all into one authority. And it seems to me, having lived with this for a very long time, that if you're going to do that, you're going to lose some of the advantages that district councils have at the present time in that they deliver services closer to people. If you're going to move away from that system to doing it at a higher authority, you lose every advantage by splitting that into different parts. You're better to move on from the council closer to people to the council in Gloucestershire. Why? Because you will then get the advantages of size, you will get huge savings in costs, which we will discuss in a minute. And do you know what? We would then be coterminous with our police, we would be coterminous with our health authorities, we would be coterminous with our fire. The whole unit would work much better. If you start to split our local government function into bits, you lose the economies of scale, but much more, I think, the efficiencies that will be produced by one unitary authority. And let me just very briefly then go on. You can't have a combined authority that people have been talking about, Gloucestershire going in with a totally new area, until you have got a unitary authority, because combined authorities can only be composed of either unitary authorities or county authorities, not districts. So we've got to go to the unitary first, and then we can all decide whether we want to go further and have a bigger authority still, combining with somebody outside Gloucestershire with an elected mayor. But that is stage 2. I think what we're really considering here, as Stephen has got to write the letter by the 21st of March, is what sort of unitary authority we want.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffrey. Could I get you to hold on to that, because I'm going to get passed along the panel. We are now going to take our... Thank you very much, three MPs, for doing that. That was really good. I hope that was helpful. I want to take a question now from the floor, and this is from Terry Cook. Terry, can you put your hand up? Because we're going to get you to ask it. So the microphone should make its way to you, so you can ask the question. I do have a copy of your question here, but we want to keep this authentic.
Unaccustomed as I am to public speaking, I will say that my question is quite simple, really, and I think it's the crux of the title of this, and that is, what is local democracy, and how do you define local in issues for things like housing and having a voice for people who are unrepresented by the local area?
Thank you, Terry. Well, that's a nice, easy question for you all to start with. I think, would you mind if we started with Stephen, as he already has the microphone? So, Stephen, what is local? What is local democracy?
Good evening, everybody. And just to start with a couple of comments, I'm impressed you're all here, by the way. I have 12 parish councils, and I say the words LGR, their eyes glaze over, so I'm really impressed you're here. The thing about where we are at is we've been told what we're going to do. So Jeffrey made the point very clearly. We could have an interesting, I will come at local democracy in 2 seconds. We could have a debate about where we're going, but the exam question has been set, and Simon articulated that. On local democracy, we are grappling with this issue at the moment that says, if you go to unitary, so just to give you where we are in the process, there's 7 councils, because it isn't me just writing a letter. We are hoping and expecting that all 7 councils, the 6 district borough and the city, plus the county council, will sign a single letter outlining 3 options as was discussed. Those same 7 councils are working on a number of work programmes, and one of them is titled locality. This has been done before in other unitary authorities, which answers the question, how do we continue to work with and get local people's input when you are in a single unitary environment, whether it's 1 unitary, unit, 2 unitary, still doesn't matter. We still need to reach out and do that. And we are going to come back with some suggestions and consult on that, because absolutely that is that loss. But you specifically mentioned housing, and we have a really interesting example of where local democracy and housing struggles. Here in Stroud, we have a local plan looking to build a large number of houses that is hampered by the fact that to make that work, we need infrastructure improvements in motorways, and I would suggest also railways. And again, as Simon said in his words, they are very difficult to do at a local level of a district, and that's been proved by the local plan. It's easier to do at a county level. We're doing it at Junction 10 with the Tewkesbury and Cheltenham development, but it's actually where combined authorities are getting the money. Now we can argue they shouldn't, or there could be a better way. I promise you, a combined authority is getting the investment that we would need to be able to deliver the local plan that Stroud District Council has developed and support the houses within the structure. So it isn't, I don't have a simple answer that you do this one thing, but believe me, we are working on that locality issue, and where you make the decision does matter. Sometimes it will be at a bigger area, sometimes more local.
Thank you, Stephen. Can I just go back a little bit? You come in here. So you're a county councillor and a district councillor, so you have perhaps a unique perspective on this. The question was, what is local democracy? And you know, it's a wide question, but what do you think about that?
I think it's quite a nebulous thing, isn't it? And it's a lot to do with how we feel. It's really important for us as Greens that the places we identify with have significant autonomous power to shape and to create and to sometimes reinvent themselves. And it's been interesting for me over the past few weeks. You know, we've got an election coming up, so I've been on doorsteps a bit, having conversations with people. And when people talk about the council, what they're talking about, if you sort of explore the conversation with them, is Stroud District Council. They are thinking about their locality in terms of a district, which in our case is about 70,000 people, because that's the kind of unit that makes sense, that delivers localised services to them. And it's quite interesting being a councillor and thinking about the kind of populations that we represent. We are currently in the UK one of the poorest in Europe in terms of how many councillors we have per unit of the population. And these proposals would really exacerbate that democratic deficit. It would take us from, we currently have 295 upper-tier councillors across Gloucestershire. If we go to a unitary, single unitary, that would take us down to 110. Before a boundary review, that would take us down to ultimately about 70 councillors. Now that's a huge reduction in terms of the people that are representing you, that are able to help you when you have issues with your local council. So I think local democracy to me is about, you know, who do people know that they can talk to if they've got a problem, and where are the lines that they can, the levers that they can pull, and how near are they? And for me, personally, county is too far away for many things.
Thank you. John, can I get your input on?
Yeah, thank you. So, right, so the question was about what is local democracy. So I think the component parts are clearly representation by elected representatives, not loads of co-opted people, transparency around decision making, so that's done in an open way, accountability, and that requires a decent turnout in voting, and it also requires mechanisms about scrutiny, so there is a way to drill into and challenge decisions that are made. It needs an active local media, and that's one of the biggest declines in the last 20 years. It's the way in which the detailed local reporting that used to happen on what is going on in a council, a lot of that doesn't exist any longer, and we get all these cut and paste PR messages that come out, particularly I'd say from Shire Hall, and they're not explored in more detail. So I think what needs to happen is for there to be mechanisms that reflect people's needs at different levels. So the parish level is critically important, particularly around things like our heritage assets and our open spaces. I was involved in the campaign around keeping the sub-rooms in public ownership, for example. So having the sub-rooms freehold held by the town council, that's a really positive thing. I think local parks is a really important thing. Parishes have got an important role in things like that. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got the need for strategic decision making. So transport links in particular have to be planned and developed at a more strategic level than just the level of the individual district council. We've heard reference to the local plan. You've seen what happens when you try to make a local plan that's critically dependent on things like transport. You don't plan for that beyond the boundary of the district council. That doesn't work because the two things don't match up. So you need a combined authority level strategic decision making, and you need a more local authority. So I would say you need the principal authorities, which are the unitary authorities they're going to be. You need a strengthened town and parish level, and you need within that what is referenced in various documents as double devolution. You need to enhance and strengthen the powers of town and parish councils, bring them to a better standard and give them resources and support in order to do that job. So I think that's very much part of the package.
Thanks, Phil. Let's move on to the next question now. Is Camilla Hale available here? Where's our microphone?
Thank you. I'm an ex-Stroud Town Councillor. Thank you, John. Parish and town councils are really vital in this new way that we're going forward, and very much have a lot of councillors, have a lot of people who represent on a very local level, and I do think that must not be forgotten and must be mentioned, and should maybe be mentioned first rather than thinking about higher tiers.
And they are not going anywhere, are they? No. Those councils are staying.
They need to stay. They need to stay, but they also need enhanced powers. So my question is about assets which are currently owned. Some are owned by the county council, some are owned by districts and boroughs. And what happens to those assets in a unitary system? Do they still belong to the district area for a while? I've been negotiating for 2 years to get a 7-year lease on a piece of district council property. So asset transfers are not going to happen quickly. The legal system is working incredibly slowly in this county, probably is everywhere. So with all of those, do those assets immediately jump into the unitary, and then a local town or parish has then got to negotiate with that unitary, or are they still somewhat owned by the people in the district? And they're ours anyway, but it's not treated like that.
All right. Well, thanks, Camilla. That's great. As John has the microphone, would you mind addressing this one first? I mean, this is obviously quite a detailed question in terms of what is going to happen to these things. So, do you know the answer to that?
Well, I know some of the answer, and Steve may be able to add to this. So there is a whole strand of work in the discussions that are going on around what you're describing. If you look across the border into Wiltshire, which is unitary and has been for a number of years, they did a whole piece of work strategically on how they created more town and parish councils and how they vested powers in them and how they transferred assets to them. So they did it in a planned and strategic way, not this piecemeal, or every time there's an asset that comes up, we want to close it down, we don't really know what to do with it. We mothball it for 4 years, we walk away, forget about it, and then we lob it at the town council in some ad hoc random way, like the old library, which is about to go on the market, for example, and no public body can find a use for it. So I think it needs to be a systematic and planned piece of work. And as I understand it, that's one of the work streams in these proposals. But not being a council leader and not directly involved in that, but that's my understanding.
Chloe, do you want to address this one as well? Pass the mic on.
Thank you. I think this is one of my big concerns about this. So partly the process takes a long time, as you pointed out, Camilla, but I think what I'm more worried about is, yes, there are some assets that come with a revenue stream, and we can pass those off to community groups or to parish and town councils without too much worry. But quite a lot of the assets that have ended up being owned by the district council, the council owns them because nobody else can afford to. And I've used the example of the Old Town Hall in Stroud, really important heritage asset, but it's not something you can just hand off to community group and expect them to fork out for, forevermore, or with very significant maintenance bills. So I think with no money being promised for the unitarisation, that's a genuine concern. How are we going to ensure the long-term safety of some of these important heritage assets?
Stephen, do you have any insight into this?
I do, thank you. Just on the town and parish, and John is absolutely right. We're starting with the Wiltshire model, which is perceived to be reasonably successful. The challenge is where you have a market town, and Stroud is a good example, Wootton would be, there are others. You can cluster around that and you can get some representation and you can get some operating town council that works. Where I live in Saul, we mainly have rural parishes, and it's how do you get the same representation for those that are further away from market town. On the subject of assets, again, Chloe's absolutely right. It is a piece of work that's been done and we are working on. And I was actually on Stroud District Council when we moved the clock to be owned by the Town Council. And the issue there was not just giving them the clock, but the money to make it and support it, because the asset is expensive in many occasions. So this is a complicated argument. There will be 3 levels of asset, I think, once you get to unitary. There will be those that a new council will use. We have just stressed that word. There's a lot of assumption this is a county council takeover. I'm very adamant this is a new council that has we have a whole work stream on culture and approach, because it must look and feel different to the county council. But the new council will need assets and it will keep those assets. There will be then those assets that are probably surplus to requirements. I have to say I don't think many people will be surplus to requirements. If you're working for one of the councils today and doing a job, that job will still be needed. But you may not need as many offices. I have to tell you, all of the council offices today are half empty as we move to a more flexible working. So there's clearly some assets that I think will be disposed of. And then there are the heritage assets, and they're the ones that I think are more difficult. It isn't that there is no money with this. Actually, in the letter we're putting in next week, we put a price tag on the work to get to unitary. We don't expect the government, I'm looking at Simon, to give us the full amount, but we put in a hefty number to encourage them. But also that there will always be a cost to moving to unitary. We might discuss later what that cost might be. But some of that cost is that, how do we manage some of those assets that go forward? So one of the good things about Gloucestershire, it's often felt we're late in this process of unitary. One of the great advantages is we can look at the mistakes made by others and we can look at those that have done well, and that's what we're doing at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Rather than getting our MPs to answer the thing about assets, I wonder, if you don't mind, I'll go on to the next question, and we'll come back to our MPs, because I think obviously our councillors are the experts on the assets, so not that you don't, obviously, of course. Okay, Sarah Lulham, if I pronounce that correctly, are you in the audience? Great.
Hello. Actually, I've changed my question, having listened, but only a little bit. Minor edits.
Sorry, it's not on the piece of paper.
Yeah, okay, so it starts off, it seems that we're picking the fleas off a dying dog here. Thank you. The current system of local government is failing us, and even in the unitary authorities, quite frankly, it's failing us. People are deeply uninterested in electing mayors. Lots of us are unengaged and don't vote. In fact, when I told my lodger I was coming out to something on local government, she rolled her eyes. They rolled their eyes at me, which says a lot, really. So it seems to me what is needed is a radical renewal of democracy. And one way forward is using citizens' assemblies. So 2 questions. One, to the leader of Gloucestershire County Council, why didn't you hold a citizens' assembly on the way forward of what we could do with the proposal that's been put to us? Rather than you tell us what you think the answer should be to government, why don't you ask us? And 2, what are the panel's views on citizens' assemblies? Thank you. Oh, do you want me to explain citizens' assemblies? Or does someone on the panel want to do it?
Before we come to that, Stephen, and we will cover citizens' assemblies, I promise. I want to just take the first part of that question about the lack of engagement, because that is an issue, isn't it? And I wonder, would you mind if we started with Sir Geoffrey on that one? I'll get our 3 MPs to talk about that, because engagement is crucial, isn't it, for democracy? If we're not engaged, we're not interested, then it dies, presumably. Sir Geoffrey?
Well, I think that actually John said something very interesting. You can gauge people's interest in local government by the turnout of elections. And it's interesting that the turnout of the general election for all of us, all the Gloucestershire's MPs, was in the region of 60+%, round about 60. I suspect that election on May the 1st, most of our councillors will be elected with about 30 to 40% turnout. So clearly, democracy in terms of local democracy is not working as well as it should. And yet, you would have thought that being closer to the people would be more interested in it, but they're not. And therefore, I think what we've got to do is, I think Stephen is absolutely right. We have no option but to go for this unitary authority of one sort or another. The governments are making us do that. Let's be absolutely clear. So whether we want local democracy or not, we have to go for this unitary authority. But I think one of the great things it's going to need to do is to work out a really good communication strategy via its newly elected unitary authority councillors to make sure that they act well and truly with the district, with the parish and town councils, so that there is a seamless sort of democracy right from the very local level, right up to the right up to the unitary level.
No, honestly, it's like do something different. You've done that for the last however many years.
Okay, look, thank you. We are going to come on to we are going to talk about citizens' assemblies, I promise you. But I just want to get a view from our.
I don't disagree. If you want something different, that's fine. But that will be up to the new unitary authority to come up with a communication strategy. Or are you talking about you want a citizens' discussion group before we get to that stage? Can you just clarify instead of what did you want?
Why don't we have a citizens' assembly and actually ask us how we want to move forward? I don't want a communication strategy. I want someone to say, hey, this is what we have to do. How do we do it? And get a representation from Gloucestershire to suggest the way forward.
Thank you, Sarah. Obviously, you're very passionate about this, and that's fantastic to hear that. But I think, obviously, but before we come on to you, Stephen, I really want to hear from Carla and Simon as well, if you don't mind. I promise you we'll come back and talk about this. But Carla, this issue of engagement, the possibility of things like citizens' assemblies, obviously mentioned by Sarah, she's very passionate about it. And this issue of that was mentioned by the previous questioner about the fact that town councils and parish councils are still going to exist. They could become more important than ever for that engagement. What's your view on that?
Well, it's quite a lot of different things back into one answer, but I'll do my best. Do you want me to cover citizens' assemblies in this answer as well, or are you going to come back from
I was going to get our local politicians to maybe.
Oh well, I've got opinions, so I'm going to stick it in my answer.
do mention it. There's no rules here.
So, Camilla, I agree with you. I think that if we are losing district councils, then town and parish councils will become ever more important, and they therefore need funding and powers to do a good job. Because, as implied by your answer earlier, too often there is not a competition. There are co-options, and they don't have the ability to do bring the benefit that they could. On the health of local democracy generally, I agree. Our local democratic system is not very healthy. Why is that? Well, I think it's partly that a lot of people do not have a very good idea of what councils or councillors do. I didn't until after I had already joined the Green Party. And if it takes joining a political party to find out, then that is not a realistic solution to making sure that everybody knows. So I think the responsibility for that is not in one place, but certainly media representation and the hollowing out of local reporting is definitely part of the story. I think in this country we have pretty bad civic education, both in schools and then ongoing in life compared to some other countries, which means that young people don't learn a bit about how democracy works, don't learn a whole heap about it, very little about local democracy, similarly little about other aspects of adulting like doing tax returns. But I'm not going to only point the finger outwards. I think it is up to politicians as well to help make sure that people understand why it is worth voting in local elections. The turnout is depressing to those of us who spend a lot of time knocking on doors and delivering leaflets. And I will not anger the chair by getting too party political, but I will just insert the interesting statistic that where Greens are elected, the turnout tends to be higher. We don't know what the factor is there. We don't know whether that is But we think it is to some extent people that don't normally bother to vote in local elections do bother when there's a realistic prospect of a Green getting elected. So, without being too party political, I do think there is an element of, if there is someone standing that is a breath of fresh air and is offering something different to the parties that have represented before, sometimes more people will come out to vote than was previously the case. And finally, on citizens' assemblies, I think that they are a really useful tool for getting a sense of what people think. Famously, a method like that was used in Ireland around reform of abortion laws, and actually in Bristol there was a citizens' assembly that was convened to specifically think about how Bristol could recover from the COVID pandemic and also tackle the climate emergency at the same time. That assembly happened as a result of a motion that was brought forward by a Green councillor, but was actually supported by the Labour administration at the time as well, and was really fruitful. So yeah, I think they have an important role to play, and this would be a good example of how you could use one.
Thank you, Carla. And Simon, it's an irony, isn't it, that the decisions that affect us arguably the most are the decisions taken by local democracies, local councils, that sort of thing, and yet we seem less interested in them than you national guys.
Yeah, no, it's true. I think local people just want things to work, actually. And they don't particularly care what structure there is, but they want their rubbish, they want decent roads, they want public transport that works and that sort of thing. And so, actually, I think very, very few people even understand local government. So what we're going to do about that? I mean, a citizens' assembly, I think, is quite a good idea. They're very complex, so they're quite difficult to set up, and you have to get representation of everyone, not just the interested few. And that's one of the real challenges, I think. I mean, meetings like this is good. This is a great turnout about local government. I've never been to such a big meeting in Stroud about local government. That's good. So maybe, maybe this government suggesting this massive change in the power structure of local government might do something to enable people. And I think the last thing about town and parish councils, I really like the idea of really small councils being responsible for fairly major things, because I think that in itself will bind people into the democratic process. It will really matter who your parish councillor is if he's really keen on getting more outdoor spaces for your village or town. So I think getting closer to people is a good way of stimulating local democracy. I think also what you were saying about young people, I've been to a number of schools, there's no political education in this country. And, I would wager that less than 10% of people know what a unitary authority is or what the county council actually do. So we need to educate first, and that starts at school. I believe we need to give 16-year-olds a vote and really stir up this democracy and get it going in that way, get young people more involved. So those would be my sort of ideas there. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen, I know you're desperate to talk. Citizens' assemblies.
And I just wanted to clarify an excellent question about consultation. The issue I see with citizens' assemblies is it would assume that it could come up with an answer that could be implemented. And I go back to my first point, that actually the exam question has been set, and we, would I have been the Gloucestershire politician who suggested unitary? No. I'm not stupid. The exam question was set, and therefore Citizens' Assembly couldn't change the exam question. And that is the problem we're at. Now, if you wanted on a separate occasion to have a discussion about what a perfect local government structure would look like, it would take several bottles of wine, but might be interesting. But it isn't the option available to us. In terms of consultation, there is some confusion currently actually in the white paper as to whether central government is going to do the consultation locally or we are expected to do it. Whatever they say they're going to do, we will do that consultation. And the time for that is after we've laid out the proposals. I come back to that. The letter next week does nothing more than lay out the options. It doesn't preclude any or include any exclusively. And then we may end up with multiple options in November too, by the way, but between that process we have the opportunity to do consultation with the public, but also with businesses. I actually, Economic Growth Forum yesterday, and they had a very clear view on what they wanted. We need to collect all of those views. And just an anecdote, because I'm not as pessimistic about our education system, we've been putting solar panels on schools, I've been visiting them. The school I went to in Fosdy, they had an environment committee who insisted, because they knew I was coming, on quizzing me. So they got solar panels, they're very pleased with that. They want to know why they couldn't have a wind turbine as well. And we got into an interesting technical discussion about planning permission for wind turbines. And they were really, really engaged and interested in that issue. And the same was I was at Stroud Primary School yesterday. And they also had a school council who had questions prepared that they were passionately involved in. It wouldn't feel like politics that this room would recognise, but it was decisions about how we do stuff, how the school spends money, and what their priorities were.
Thank you, Stephen. We have a renewables engineer on the panel, actually, so if you want to talk to her afterwards. Yeah, of course, yeah, sorry.
Just to quickly clarify, the reason you gave, Stephen, for Citizens' Assemblies not working is that they wouldn't answer the question they've been sent, but I'm afraid I think you've misunderstood how Citizens' Assemblies work, because the whole point of how they work is that both it is a representative sample that is representative of the population, so that's I mean, you do have to put effort into it, but it isn't impossible to do. It is easily done. It's the same way that the audience for question time is done, so that's done every week. And you can require, and you do, that's how it works, require a Citizens' Assembly to answer a specific question, and their meetings are facilitated to get them to that. So it's not an unstructured chat over several bottles of wine. It will get to the question or questions that you put to them.
Right, I don't want to get caught in the weeds of Citizens' Assemblies necessarily, because obviously we've got other things to discuss, but I think we have covered that pretty well. John, did you want to say anything about this subject before we move on? And Chloe as well, I'll come to you in a sec. I'm trying to give everybody a crack on the whip here, as you probably noticed, so apologies if it feels a bit cumbersome.
Yeah, well, in terms of how to make things more representative, if you look at the election notices in May last year, you'll see that for our town and parish councils, which we've got everywhere in the Stroud District, there are virtually no elections. The vast majority of people get a return unopposed, and there are some, even here in Stroud Town, and myself and Camilla spent 5 years working together on the town council, so even in Stroud Town, there were uncontested elections and vacant seats. So at the smallest level, there's that deficit. At the district council level, and Chloe's right about this, that's where people are more engaged. If you look at standalone district council elections, you'll typically see something like about a 45% turnout. If you look at county council elections, standalone, typically they're significantly lower, often 35%-ish, because even though 75% of your council, if you look at your bill, 75% of that goes to county council services, yet the turnout is lower in county council elections than it is in district council elections. And that's because it's that bit more remote, physically and culturally and politically. It's more distant from people's lives. And when they want to organise a protest to the council, they pitch at the district council, even if it's not on a district council matter, because that's what people mean when they say the council. And that's one of the reasons I think actually having one big county-wide unitary is not a good idea, and other models should be looked at. So I think there's a need for more engagement, more representation. I think citizens' assemblies have a role. I think the social legislation in Ireland is a really good example of where they were used. I think if it was a piece of work that had been done around assisted dying, for example, which is Simon's on the select committee for assisted dying, I think that would have really helped, rather than just going in cold with, here's a bill with one point of view. So for things like that, I can see it working. For this particular change, we have been left behind in Gloucestershire by many other parts of the country. As David mentioned, since the early 1990s, there have been a series of reviews on local government where area after area has moved to unitary, and every time when these reviews come to Gloucestershire, they go away thinking, this is impossible, no one agrees with each other, we'll never get any consensus, let's move on. And then so we are now surrounded by multiple unitary authorities in a little island of two-tier local government. And that has to change. This is an opportunity for us to change that.
Thank you. So I think John's saying we're a bit of a basket case, but...
I thought John was arguing for the continuation of district councils there for a minute. No, I just want to say, I think what we're hearing from Sarah very clearly there is just the frustration with the lack of community voice in this process so far. You know, the brutal timetable from government that has allowed no opportunity in defence of the county council, not something that happens often for me, no opportunity for consultation. And even between now and November, when we have to firm up our proposals, government is not pushing consultation, it's vaguely suggesting we could do it. And I'm really concerned when we look back at the track record of unitaries that have been done badly. We look at Somerset, for example. The community were asked, do you want a unitary? They said no. Government said, right, you're having a unitary. The community were then asked, do you want 2 unitaries or 1? They said 2. Government said, right, you're having 1. So we know what we don't want to do, but unfortunately it looks like that sort of behaviour is coming down the tracks again. And I hear what you're saying, Sarah, particularly when we've got the accelerating climate crisis. It's so important we have engaged, resilient communities, and citizen assemblies are one of the best evidence ways of ensuring that everybody is brought in and everybody does have a voice. And particularly when climate is one of the things that's being located at the strategic authority level, the furthest away from our communities, I think there's an even greater case for using citizens assemblies to make sure we're all involved in decision making.
Well, let's have a citizens' assembly about this. Why don't we do that? About what unitary we have. I don't know how to set one up. Sarah, can you set one up? I don't know. It's a way to discuss it, isn't it? We need to make a decision somehow.
But there isn't much time, though, is there?
Well, we've got till November. All we have to do towards the end of the month is put in the options, and then we have to November. So there is time to do it. That's just a suggestion.
Anyway, thank you very much, Sarah. I really want to move on because we've got a lot of questions.
I think that getting together with the Greens and with the other parties, I believe a legal reform on Stroud District Council, and we can do that through Stroud District Council, which is something perhaps we wasting money through.
Okay, you've got your homework, guys. That's what you're going to do. Right, let's move on because we have got quite a bit of ground to cover. So I've got some questions that we emailed in, but I'm hoping the person who emailed them is in the audience of people. Is Steve Lydon here?
Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Steve Lydon. I'm now here as the Vice Chair of Gloucestershire Parish Council. Just a couple of comments. I chaired the last unitary working party at Shire Hall in 2016. To bear out John Blox's comments, there was total disinterest, certainly from the controlling group and the rest of the districts, other than the Labour, Green and Lib Dem structure here, to actually take forward any discussion on it. That would have been the perfect time for us, of course, to then join. We could have joined WECA, West of England Combined Authority, at the start. But now, of course, we're 10 years behind. And to be fair, Gloucestershire is very much behind a lot of this. And so when people say, why are government taking this forward? To be frank, it's neglect of democracy not to look at this reorganisation. And Gloucestershire left its own would still carry on in its own sweet way. My major question is about the mayoral elections, etc., that come above to the tier above this. And certainly, be interested in Carla's experience, because of course you did have a mayor in Bristol, and I was part of the team that actually brought in the structured other mayor because Bristol Council was seen as a failing council, which is why the whole mayoral structure was brought in. So I'd be interested in your views now. But I do understand you as the Green Party are also taking part in the WECA elections. My main point now is, what do people see as the advantage and disadvantage in terms of having an elected mayor, particularly giving examples up and down the country elsewhere. I think there are some limits, but I would like to hear what you people actually got to see on that.
Thanks, Steve. That's great. We've got to the question eventually. Let's have your view on this then, because obviously Bristol already has a mayor. So.
Well, Bristol for a while had 3 mayors. Now, talking about confusing local government systems, we really took the biscuit because Bristol had what was originally just called the mayor and then became the Lord Mayor. So that is the person wearing the feathery hat and the chain who cuts the ribbon, which is Bristol has had for about 800 years. And then in 2011, 12, can't remember, one of those, 11 I think, Bristol had an imposed referendum set by national government that 10 or so places were told to do on whether they wanted a directly elected mayor to replace the council leader. So rather than the leader of the council being usually the leader of the largest political group, it would be somebody elected separately. Bristol narrowly voted yes, but on a 22% turnout, with only fractionally over 50% of that. So in practice, only about 11.5% of Bristolians voted for a directly elected mayor. And I know from door knocking at the time that a significant proportion of those people thought that they were voting on whether to keep the Lord Mayor or scrap it. And so most of them didn't understand what the Lord Mayor had ever done wrong and why we needed to get rid of them. After 10 or so years of having a directly elected mayor, initially an independent one and then Labour, Bristol had another referendum and decided with a higher turnout and a larger majority that actually we don't like the mayoral system, we've tried it, it wasn't better, we're going to go to a modern committee system, which is not going back to what we'd had before, but a different approach which allows all parties to have a meaningful political say in the decisions that are made. And that's something that I've always supported, because I think that although having a single powerful man, and it is usually a man, at the top of the tree that can unilaterally make decisions without needing to get buy-in from their colleagues, does result in being able to make decisions more quickly, those decisions aren't necessarily better. The research shows that if a group of people is more diverse, politically as well as from their background, they're more likely to make good quality decisions because they're less likely to have not thought of a certain angle. They're more likely to spot the potential unintended consequences of a plan. And so I support a committee way of working because I think nobody has a monopoly on good ideas, not even the Greens. And so we want a wide variety of different political perspectives as well as lived experience in the room, because we think that even if that sometimes might mean the decisions happen a bit slower, they will be better decisions, and they will also, because everybody was involved, be less likely to be overturned when another party becomes the largest party in a few years down the line. And then very briefly on combined authority, so that's this new next level up that we already have over in Bristol with the West of England Combined Authority. I'm particularly sceptical of that model of mayor because the Metro Mayor doesn't even have a council. So in Bristol, when we had a mayor and then we had 70 councillors who in theory were holding him to account, but in practice we only really had the voting on the budget and a few other strategic plans, and other than that all we had is the sort of soft power to persuade him or not. Whereas at the combined authority level, there aren't even councillors at that level. It is just the mayor and then the leaders of the constituent councils, and so there is no scrutiny, there's very little accountability, and there is less cross-party working, which I think doesn't lend itself to good quality decisions.
Okay, thanks for that. Some of these metropolitan mayors, up north particularly, are quite high profile. They seem to get things done. I mean, what do you see as the advantages or disadvantages of this strategic authority being headed by a mayor?
Well, it may be high profile, but I'm not sure how well they get things done. And that's very interesting that Carla says that they had a mayor in Bristol and they had a referendum to get rid of him. So I've spent 30 years representing some of the most rural bits of Gloucestershire. And I've had continual discussions throughout that time, mostly with my Conservative colleagues, on an amicable basis, but nevertheless trying to represent my constituents to get proper resources out of Gloucester into the rural bits of the North Cotswolds. If we get the bigger and bigger units we get, we're not necessarily going to get a mayor with a unitary authority for Gloucestershire. We probably won't, and probably shouldn't. But if we go for a combined authority, which is going to be 1 million people plus, we have, if it was Weka, we might have some mayor from Bath. If it was Worcestershire and Herefordshire, we might have somebody right up in Worcester or even further north. So I'm not sure that one person, and I think actually Carla made a really important point, they might make decisions quicker, they might get higher profile, but what we really want, as John said, is actually the services to work locally. And I'm not sure by going for a bigger unit, particularly with an elected mayor, is actually going to improve that process.
Thank you, Sir Geoffrey. Simon, would you get the microphone? I'd like to just go through this as well, please.
Yeah, it's always a difficult one, isn't it? Because it sort of depends on who you get, really. So, in terms of, I think in the north, actually, I think Andy Burnham and Tracy Graven have been really impressive, and I think they've led their areas to really good places. And I think Andy Street was quite good actually as well. So it sort of depends on quality of that character. Do I believe in the system? I tend to be more like Carla. I tend to think that a committee of people tend to make better decisions a little bit slower. So I'm not particularly in favour or against the mayor, but it does really depend on that quality of that person. If you get a good one and you devolve power properly, and that means giving funding, a lot of funding, away from central government, I think it's a real opportunity. And the mayor thing, it may be a bit of a red herring. It's about getting power into the regions, and they have to get re-elected. It's a democratic position. So I'm in two minds on that one. I think it's a good system if you get a good person. That's my thinking about it. And that's up to us to make sure we have really good candidates and vote them in. But we need a system that gives power to us locally. That's the main thing. And if that's through one person or a committee, I don't really mind. So that's my conclusion.
Thanks, Simon. I'm going to move on now to Roger Clues sent in a question. Is Roger in the room?
Thanks, Chair. My question's about the higher level strategic authority.
Can you hold it a bit closer?
Yeah, just hold the mic a little closer to your mouth. Thanks.
Question about the higher level strategic authority, whether the panel think there's a natural grouping into which Gloucestershire would fit or not, and if not, what are the pros and cons of the different options? And I think it's interesting that there are 3 options on the piece of paper we were given when we came in, which perhaps indicates there isn't a natural grouping that Gloucestershire obviously fits into. I think to some extent you could say that the strategic authorities that currently exist by and large are centred around a large city region, if you like. It's not clear to me that Gloucestershire fits into a city region in that way. So that's my question really. What are the options and what are the pros and cons of the different options?
Thank you.
And could I also ask about the timescale? Because that was, I think I heard that it's unitaries first and combined authorities second. What is the timescale for that, please?
Okay. Can we go to John first, as the mic is right by him?
Okay, thank you. So options. Well, I think the draft letter that's in the public domain says going north, link to Hereford and Worcester, or going east, link into Oxfordshire, or going south, link into Weka. Weka's the more logical route. Clearly that includes South Gloucestershire, which historically was part of Gloucestershire, as was Bristol if you go back as well. Gloucestershire County Cricket Club still plays in Bristol. So there is some logic to that. And if you think about the whole hub and economic connectivity between Bristol going up to Cheltenham, there's clearly some advantage in building strategic planning around that kind of footprint. I mean, Hereford and Worcester, the commonalities are, the Three Choirs Festival, the Vineyard, And for most of Gloucestershire, there isn't a strong degree of connectivity there. And I think as far as going east is concerned into Oxfordshire, clearly there are links in there into the M4 corridor, but actually I think they're pretty much cut tight, reading what everybody else is doing in that area. So, and in terms of timescales, the white paper says that by the end of this Parliament, every part of the country will be in some form of strategic combined authority, and there's an invitation to councils to start a dialogue with each other to work out how they want to form those combinations. There's been an ongoing dialogue with North Somerset Council, who are seeking to join WECA. That's ongoing, and as I understand it, there is a route map being planned out for them as to how they will do that, and that clearly could be a model which Gloucestershire could follow, but it would follow on from the formation of unitary authorities and would need to give us a vote in the next mayoral elections, not the one this May, but the one that's taking place in 2029.
Chloe, do you think there's a natural fit for us?
I'm just going to do a jargon buster on the way past, because I realise I'm not sure we expanded that acronym. So WECA is the West of England Combined Authority, so that's that next level up, and at the moment it has Bristol, Bath and North East Somerset and South Gloucestershire in it, just in case anyone wasn't familiar.
Wikipedia, isn't it? Brilliant.
Yeah, I don't have masses to add to what John said, but just to say in terms of time frame, yes, it will take longer to form the strategic authority, but it's clear in the white paper the expectation is that whatever you're doing at the unitary authority needs to support what you would then do at the strategic authority. So the decision making about which route to go sort of needs to be made at the same time. You need to have a plan for both by November. And then, yeah, in terms of which one we go for, I mean, that we need to know people's views on this. There are lots of things you could test against. Economic geographies are really important, existing structures are really important, but identity is really important as well. And for me, the pull to Bristol is pretty strong, but that might feel a bit different if you live in Tewkesbury, and maybe you look somewhere quite different. So it's something we will need to talk about between now and then. But I personally, there are so many commonalities with the West of England Combined Authority in terms of the economic geography and where people tend to look from a lot of Gloucestershire, that I would have thought that was the best option. But yeah, ready to hear everyone else's views.
Stephen, let's, is there a natural fit? Is WECA it?
So we've got to be very careful on this. We do not have to make this decision now, and it's a little bit of a process of courting and being courted. So it's, and I'll explain the complexity of joining WECA in just a moment. So therefore I think it's important we collect information, and one of those work groups we've set out is doing just that. What are the options and how do they fit? I have spoken to almost all of the people involved. I've spoken to the leader at Worcestershire and Herefordshire, who would love us to join them. And I have a deep suspicion there was a version of the white paper that actually had us connected to them without any discussion. And I think that was then crossed out. But either way, we solve the problem that they don't want any orphans, and Herefordshire is right on the edge of Wales. The Oxfordshire one seems odd, but the Labour MP for Gloucester is particularly interested in Oxfordshire and Swindon, and I can see some synergy in that. I actually grew up in Oxfordshire, I like Oxfordshire, but I have a problem with Oxfordshire, and I've spoken to the leader there. If they go any further east, then I think that's, takes them off the table. And Buckinghamshire is still unattached. And if they became attached to Buckinghamshire, I think we find it very difficult to answer the question why our mayor might come out of Buckinghamshire. So I think that one may disappear, but we need to know and we need to do the work. There is a lot of support for WECA. When we meet as the leaders, and we meet as the leaders of the 7 councils plus their chief executives, the general, if you'd gone for a majority decision, and we didn't, WECA would have been it. But it was said earlier, Tewkesbury have a different view. They're not adamant on their view yet, but they feel closer to Worcestershire in some ways, and I'm sure much of Sir Geoffrey's constituency probably look that way as well. But the problem with WECA, there are two problems with WECA. The government has made it very easy to create a combined authority. It's less easy to join one. If you ask North Somerset, they have been knocking at the door for some time and should really have been let in with this set of elections in May.
In the first place.
So there is an issue in joining one. There's interestingly, there's no mechanism to divorce one, which I think ought to be created as well. But the easy thing to do is to create one, the more difficult one to join one. If we join WECA, WECA currently has about £500 million of funding to be allocated on infrastructure projects, and that's partly why we need to get into a combined authority. It is where the money is flowing. But they're not going to let us join and give us some of that £500 million. They would expect us to turn up with a contribution. Our view is that contribution should come from central government as our dowry. You'd expect us to say that. But clearly, it's a more difficult negotiation to join an existing organisation that has a budget, has funding, has infrastructure plans, than it would be to create a brand new one. So at this point, I'm staying a little bit non-committal. I do have a proper preference, but a bit non-committal because I think we need to look at the options seriously. But as Chloe said, at some point, we will have to come out in favour of one or the other. To complete the story, I have also spoken to the leader in South Gloucestershire and the leader in Bristol, both of which are adamant they would welcome us into WECA, but of course it's not their sole decision. Because there is a mayor involved in this as well. Can I just say on mayors, I struggle. I think mayors in cities work because they've got an identity. I think I struggle in rural areas, and Steve knows more about this than I do in the history. We've always struggled with discussing unitary in Gloucestershire because of the idea of a Gloucestershire mayor. Now, we're not being asked to do that this time, which is good. But in rural areas, it is difficult to see how a mayor has the same identity that an Andy Street does or an Andy Merton does.
Thank you. We've got an anonymous question here. So
Are you going to let me answer? Everybody else has.
Well, I think on that question, I was just saying the local councillors, yes, of course.
I want to make a very important point on this. I'm agnostic about where Gloucestershire goes for this reason. Gloucestershire sits roughly halfway between Birmingham and halfway between Bristol. Now, if you are living and working in Mickleton, in the northeast of the county, you'd almost certainly want to look towards Birmingham and Hereford and Worcester. If you are sitting in Berkeley or Wootton-under-Edge, which I used to represent, you would want to, and you work in Bristol, you would want to go towards WECA. So there is no precise answer to this. There's going to be a divergence of opinion. What everybody will have to do is try and work out where the larger number of people want to go. And that's not going to be easy either, because I suspect Cheltenham may well tilt towards Birmingham, whereas Gloucester may well tilt towards Bristol. So it's going to be a difficult decision. We need to have a lot of debate about it.
Are there other MPs want to talk about it? Because I sorry to leave you out, Jeffrey, but I was just using the local councillors there. So.
I only want to ask Stephen if he can recall who was in government when WECA was created, who set the rules for how difficult it was to join combined authorities after the fact, and in fact who was in administration in North Somerset when they decided not to join.
Okay, well, thanks for the point there. I do think actually that our choice of combined authority has to dictate what sort of unitary we have. First of all, they have to want a certain type of unitary, and we have to do it, but it may be that the sort of south or west, or whatever it's called, is better going south, and maybe the north is better going north. But that will dictate what we get in Gloucestershire, I think. So it's a really important decision.
So you're advocating east and west, not south and north?
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
You're better.
Yeah, the geography was confusing to me. It didn't look like east and west when I looked at the map. But anyway, we've got a question, it's an anonymous question, so I'm going to read it out. And it's back to the unitary authorities as opposed to the strategic authorities. Because in my introduction and in the paperwork that you got when you came to this meeting, we talked about 3 options, and I'm sure our local councillors are experts on all 3. But the question is, what are the pros and cons of those 3 options, and and do we have any sense where we're going to fall on that decision yet? So, John, I'd like to start with you as a local councillor.
Okay, so in reverse order, the donor is a daft idea. and nobody outside of Jeremy Hilton's brain wants to see it happen. It's the brainchild of a leader of a minority administration in one district council. It has no traction or support outside of that, and it will be fiercely resisted by the parishes adjacent to Gloucester. And the idea that you kind of just have two unitaries, so you have one in the middle and then you encircle it entirely. I think Cambridgeshire had something like that, and it doesn't seem to me that's a very sensible idea at all. One unitary, clearly there's an advantage in one because it's more simple and it more readily lends itself to alignment with some of the other structures. Disadvantage of that is it's very big. It will get even bigger in 20 years' time. It will be as big as North Yorkshire. It will be even more remote, in my view, and out of touch than the county council already is, and I think that's already a big problem. And you see that in the quality of decision making, in the way that it does not engage with communities in the way that the local authority should do. So I think that's a real problem of having one big, massive unitary. For me, the right place to be is, I think, going to be two, because there will at least be more chance that they will have an understanding of the needs and natures of the areas that they represent. They'll be more accessible to people. They will still be sufficiently large, well over 300,000, in order to provide services on an efficient basis. So from my point of view, I think that's what I would like to see as a preference, but clearly there's more work to be done. All the letters that are going in next week, from jointly signed by the 7 authorities, just say, here's a list of things we're looking at, not what we have agreed to, because there isn't any agreement at this stage. There are different views, and there's a piece of work that County Council have produced as a piece of work that Cheltenham had published, which only went up on their website about 5 o'clock. So if you want to have a look at that, look at the Cheltenham Borough Council website, meeting agenda for Monday. They've got a special cabinet and a council, and there's a very detailed report there setting out their case, which is for 2 unitaries, and there's a piece of work that the County Council Commission is setting out a case for 1. So, have a read.
Okay, Chloe, can we get your view on this, please, of those 3 options?
Yeah, a bit like John, I think the Gloucester donut only really makes sense if you've never been to Cheltenham, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that one. But in terms of the other 2, I suppose as Greens, our starting point is going to be what's going to work best for our communities, what delivers democratic representation best, what delivers the best service delivery, what's going to make people, what's going to serve them best. So my starting point would therefore be, on the face of it, 2 unitaries appears to offer better democratic representation, but does it? It's going to cost more to deliver, and is that the best way to use that money? When we look at existing unitaries, somewhere like Wiltshire, for example, has locality boards, it has devolved planning committees for different parts of the district. Sounds a little bit like district councils again, doesn't it? But so is that easier to deliver and with 1 unitary than it is with 2? So at this point, there's so much more work to do to explore what the reality looks like and what is actually going to work for our communities, that I don't feel we're in a position yet to decide between those 2.
Stephen, do you have a strong view?
I have a strong view for 1, and actually, as Geoffrey referenced, coterminus of our health service, which we hope will now have more autonomy now they've got rid of NHS England, but also with our police force. And I've never met anybody who woke up in East Gloucestershire. They woke up in Gloucestershire. So I fundamentally think 1. I think when you see the numbers, just to reference the Cheltenham document, the work we commissioned, we shared the scope and the contents with all 7 as it became available. Cheltenham commissioned this work, didn't tell the other 7, actually they told 4 of the 7. They forgot to tell Tewkesbury, because they know Tewkesbury is in favour of 1 unitary. And then have published it without any reference to the rest of the group, which is a little bit underhand and has unfortunately caused a lot of disquiet in the group of people who were trying to come to a conclusion. But there are lots of financial reasons which are outlined in the detailed appendix on the letter that we will see. But think of it, we have statutory responsibilities as a council. We have to have a chief executive, we have to have a head of children's services, have an adult social care, have a monitoring officer and a finance officer. Just duplicating those alone will cost you £9 million a year. When you look at all of those staff that would have to be duplicated, you'd split highways. But children's services, which I used to run before I became leader, finding a good director of children's services, and we've seen massive improvement in our children's services, is really difficult. To split that in two would be absolute madness. And anybody who shakes their head and thinks, oh, we shared services, well, if you're sharing services, you're a single unitary. But finally, and we should worry about this here, in what would be West Gloucestershire. West Gloucestershire and East Gloucestershire, as broken out by the district boundaries, which is what the government have said, would have a similar tax base to East Gloucestershire. But I can tell you all the areas of deprivation in this county are in Gloucester and the Forest of Dean. So you'd have a higher cost base, but the same tax base. So it'd be incredibly unbalanced. And finally, and I actually believe that without reading the exam question, but the exam question that was set in the white paper is a minimum of 500,000 population in a unitary. And they do that because the work they have done says that 500,000 is a viable council. And we are 658, I think somebody had 660,000. We comfortably fit over the 500,000. If you split us in half, we fall drastically below that and become uneconomic in effect, which is why I would go for one. But the main reason is, and if you go and knock on doors, as all of us on this stage do, the public don't understand if you say, which bit of Gloucestershire did you wake up in this morning?
Okay, thank you, Stephen. I'm going to ask our MPs this same question now. If that's okay, we'll start with Simon.
Well, people already wake up in South Gloucestershire, but look, I don't think we should even really be discussing this now. Maybe we need to investigate what's best for Gloucestershire, and I think that I tend to feel that two unitaries would give better democratic representation to people. It will be slightly more expensive, so it's swings and roundabouts to a degree. But we have to decide, what we want, and then we also must decide which strategic authority we join. Now, WECA might not be interested in one half of Gloucestershire, but they might want the whole lot. Now, if that's the case, we should perhaps, and we decide to go with WECA, did you see what I mean? So one decision predicates another, and we mustn't close off any avenues. On the other hand, I always prefer, now, if you have a two unitaries, that's about 330, like you were saying. That's not particularly small. 660 is in the top 10 size-wise in the whole country. It's quite big. So one's a little bit too small, one's a bit too big. So I don't think there's anything about size that makes any difference. So let's just, I think we need to discuss it and just be very loose about it and see what feels best, having put a couple of alternatives up. And also, we need to talk to these strategic authorities and see, how it could work better. And it may be that actually splitting it will work much better on the strategic authority or not. So we have to keep an open mind, and I think that's really important. That's what I'd say.
Thank you, Simon. Carla?
Thank you. On the size point, Stephen is right that the exam question has been set on the basis of 500,000, but then after the government officially said that, the minister then said in public that actually ones that are around 300, 350,000 would be okay. So what part of the problem is that the exam question keeps changing. On the substantive question, I agree with Chloe that I think more work is needed. I can see the arguments for two unitaries or a single one. I also really hear Chloe's point that two unitaries might end up sounding good on paper but actually not working very well because of, I won't repeat what Chloe said, she described it perfectly adequately. And on that point I'm going to shut up because I said earlier that I believe in decisions being made at the lowest practical level, and Chloe is much more of an expert on this than I am, being a locally elected representative.
So Geoffrey?
Well, I think it comes back to what's going to work best. That's the fundamental question. It should not be taken on any political decisions. That's not the way to do it. What is going to work best? And I think, as Cara said, I think there's probably more still work to be done on this. I don't think any of us are actually sitting here at the moment until that work has been done. And it'll be well and truly, I am absolutely certain, in the public domain. We'll all have all that information. We'll all be able to express a view. So I think at this stage it is a bit early to say. Just suffice it to say that I spend my life chairing the Public Accounts Committee looking at the best way that our taxpayers' pound can be spent. And the more structures you have, they've all got to have mechanisms to talk to each other. They've all got to have duplication of officers. I think we need to think about that very carefully. I think that one Gloucestershire, coterminous with health, coterminous with fire, coterminous with police, with a really good set of officers, a really good set of councillors keeping them up to account, could well be the answer. But I'm still keeping an open mind on this question.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we are just about out of time now. So thank you, huge thanks to our panel for appearing here tonight. It's been really interesting. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have and you've learned something from it. I also want to, of course, thank the church for hosting this event. Thank you very much for doing that. And thank you very much if you attended. And of course the volunteer organisers, the people in high-vis jackets, they're all here on their own time helping us out making this happen. So thank you very much for that. Before I let you all go, there's one more bit of audience participation we want to do. And we just want to show our hands really. And the first question I'd like you to put your hands up if you agree with this is, do you know more than you did at the start of this meeting about local government organisation? Oh, that's a great result. Oh, well, congratulations, panel. I think you've done your job. And my second question, slightly more controversial. Do you think local government reorganisation is a good idea? Hands up. That's not bad. Good. Well, thank you very much, all of you, for joining in and for asking your questions. And again, thanks to our fantastic panel who are so well informed and I think have helped a lot. Thank you.